Doris Duke dies under highly suspicious circumstances, leaving an estate worth over $1 billion. Accusations of theft, corruption, drug abuse, and even murder abound.
It was like a feeding frenzy for lawyers.
Hordes of lawyers battle each other for the loot. But why did Doris Duke leave control of her vast fortune to her butler?
It just made a better story to say that the butler did it. But in this case, the butler didn't do it.
But was he a doting caregiver or a manipulative gold digger who hastened her demise? October 28, 1993, Doris Duke, aged 80, dies in Beverly Hills, California. She leaves more than $1 billion and an army of fortune hunters. Her butler, Bernard Lafferty, is named executor of the will. But has Doris entrusted her vast wealth to the right man? Doris was born into one of the richest families in America. Her philanthropist father, James Buchanan Duke, the benefactor of Duke University, owns some of the largest companies in the U.S., including Duke Power and American Tobacco, the makers of Lucky Strike cigarettes.
Hi, Daddy.
Buck loves his only child fiercely and is obsessed with her safety. From bodyguards to routine disinfection of the house to stave off disease, he spares no expense in shielding Doris. He tries to warn Doris about the curse of having too much money. Buck teaches her that because of her wealth, she should trust no one. When Buck dies in 1925, 12-year-old Doris inherits $80 million. The press nicknames her the richest girl in the world. Doris quickly asserts her independence, even suing her own mother for control over her inheritance. Her father has made it clear that he did not even trust his wife. Doris wins the trial. Doris does not lead a conventional life. She marries twice, but the marriages are short-lived. Her only child, a daughter named Arden, dies at birth, and sadly, Doris can never have children again. But she has the ultimate jet-set lifestyle and a string of dashing lovers. Doris travels extensively and collects countless treasures. The arts become her real passion. She has 5 residences: Duke Farms in New Jersey, Falcon's Lair in Beverly Hills, California, Rough Point in Newport, Rhode Island, a penthouse in New York City, and Shangri-La in Hawaii, that she decorates with an impressive collection of Islamic art. She shuttles between these homes in her own Boeing 737. As she approaches her 70s, Doris Duke becomes fascinated by a book about the extension of the human lifespan. She summons the book's medical editor, Dr. Harry Dimopoulos, and asks him to be her personal doctor.
I said, sure, I'd be happy to. What is your schedule like, Doris? She said, Dr. Dimopoulos, I don't have a schedule. I'm not busy at all. And that was the first indication that I had that she was kind of lonely, and she longed for people's company. What many people don't know is that Doris Duke was an excellent businesswoman. She knew how to manage her money. She knew how to make it grow. She knew how to manage people. She was incredible. I never charged for any of my examinations. I paid all my own expenses when I had to travel. I don't know, somehow the subject about money never came up. I would have felt as if I was rendering a bill to somebody in my family or a close friend, and you just don't do that.
At age 31, a young divorcee named Shandi Hefner joins Doris's eclectic inner circle of friends. Shandi is a belly dancer and a Hare Krishna disciple. They develop such a tight bond that 4 years later, Doris legally adopts her. For Doris, Shandi is the reincarnation of Arden, the daughter she lost at birth.
Shandi was instantly a great person in Doris's eyes because she was pretty, she was smart, laughed all the time. What do you do about an older female who longs to have children? Shandi was the first real family that she had. She shunned the other people that shared her name. She thought they were fortune hunters. Doris asked me point blank, should I adopt Shandi? And I said, Doris, she's perfect. You couldn't ask for a more perfect daughter.
Soon after the adoption, Shandi falls in love with James Burns, one of Doris's bodyguards.
He was handsome, charming, very likable. And Doris was okay with that. Even when it got hot and heavy, she said, what do you think of him? I said, Doris, I think he's a great guy. I think they make a great couple. She looked at me, laughing. I said, yeah, Doris, you're going to have a family with grandchildren. She said, yeah, she said, with a great big smile on her face, and I'm going to have to raise those brats. That was her attitude. She was looking forward to it.
In 1987, Doris hires a butler, Bernard Lafferty. He has good credentials, having worked for Peggy Lee and Elizabeth Taylor. Doris is not concerned with Lafferty's self-admitted drinking problem. Orphaned as a teenager, poor and uneducated, the Irish-born Lafferty emigrated to the U.S. in the 1970s. He worked his way up from restaurant waiter to butler for celebrities and the super rich.
The word obsequious was invented for Bernard Lafferty.
Thank you, Bernard.
He had all the superficial mannerisms of a very polite, attentive butler. But that was a facade. And he did not like the fact that Shandi was a gifted daughter, that Doris loved her, and it was obvious to whom the estate would pass when and if Doris passed.
As time goes by, Shandi takes control, handling Doris's finances and running the household. She is making enemies with the staff, including Bernard Lafferty. He convinces Doris that Shandi wants to poison her. Three years after the adoption, Doris takes action.
After a while, I heard Doris on the phone asking me, Harry, do you trust me? I said, sure, Doris, of course I trust you. I've known you now for 10 years. She said, well, I think Shandi's trying to poison me. I said, come on. There's no way that that could be possible. She said, no, I'm sorry. I can't stay here in Hawaii. I'm afraid for my life. I have to get rid of her.
Dr. Demopoulos is very concerned that his friend Doris Duke wants to cut ties with her adoptive daughter, Shandi.
So I embarked on a program to try to mend things. So I called Shandi in Honolulu. I said, Shandi, what the heck is going on? Doris is way off on some wrong track into thinking that you're somehow poisoning her. And she said, that's crazy. And she said, I think I know who it is. I said, well, there aren't too many people in the house that could spread those kinds of lies that Doris would have any interest in paying attention to. I said, but the first person that comes to mind is Bernard Lafferty. She said, well, yeah, he's been acting kind of funny. I think he's the guy that wants to be Mr. Duke. We tried for about 2 weeks. They had some brief conversations. It didn't work.
No, Harry, I'm sorry. Goodbye.
Harry Demopoulos cannot convince Doris Duke that her butler is manipulating her. She believes that her adoptive daughter, Shandi, is really trying to poison her. Doris has Shandi and her boyfriend evicted from Shangri-La without a penny.
When Shandi was forced out, the only people that she had to rely on, truly, was Bernard Lafferty, because he had closed her in.
Doris now wants to disinherit her adopted daughter, Shandi. She consults attorneys Suzelle Smith and Dawn Howarth.
It was 2 or 3 years before her death. Bernard Lafferty, her butler, answered the door in a tuxedo, very formal butler outfit.
She was then in her late 70s, and she was alert. She was on top of her game, I would say. Doris Duke was one of those people who actually, I think, looked better as she got older. She was a pleasure to meet and completely in control of herself.
So she used her wealth to screen people and also to some extent to control people. And her wills in particular, she was very fond of using the wills to cut people in and cut people out. And she had lawyers for decades writing and rewriting wills. What Miss Duke wanted to do was disadopt Miss Hefner. And we explained to Miss Duke that there was no such thing as disadoption. Miss Duke said, I don't understand this. I've divorced 2 husbands. Why can't I disadopt? And we said, in the eyes of the law, she's your daughter. So after your death, she could challenge any will. She might not win, but she could challenge any will. And Miss Duke said, well, you guys will be around to deal with that after my death.
A year later, Doris is still in good health. Bernard Lafferty follows her everywhere and has become indispensable. Christopher Mason met Doris through a mutual friend that year.
Well, so I'd been waiting for her in her living room, and suddenly I heard her say, well, if he's here, why didn't you offer him champagne? And I figured that she was talking to her butler. Then she walked into the room. The butler was following her with a silver tray with a bottle of Veuve Clicquot champagne and a couple of glasses. And she kind of emerged, and she looked very dramatic. She had very white skin, blonde hair, very tall, and she was wearing a Valentino ball gown. So she looked almost kind of theatrical. When I was in her apartment and Bernard was out of the room, I turned to Doris and I said, so who is Bernard? And she kind of laughed, she sort of smiled, and she said, well, I guess he's a butler, that's what you would call him. But there was kind of laughter in her eyes, as if he was so much more than just a butler. He was a constant companion, and they had a lot of fun together. I was fascinated by their relationship, really, because clearly she was the boss, he was working for her, but between them there was an extraordinary sort of warmth, and there was almost a kind of tenderness.
She didn't have any choice about anyone else that she could rely on. Bernard Lafferty's plot was working.
According to Dr. Demopoulos, encouraged by her butler, Doris undergoes an extensive facelift at 79 years old.
It was a fatal mistake that initiated a whole train of events.
Recuperating at home, she breaks her hip.
She was admitted to Cedars Sinai Hospital, and that's when she got into the hands of other doctors who curiously filled her with all kinds of sedatives, happy pills to keep her in a good mood.
Dr. Harry Glassman, her plastic surgeon, recommends Dr. Charles Kivowitz to be her personal physician.
She had 4 hospitalizations during that year, 1992. She had never been hospitalized before. Not on my watch, as they say. In 1993, the fatal year, Lafferty convinced her to have yet more surgery. And he said, Doris, you can have beautiful knees again. Doris fell for it, and she had both knees replaced. Now that's unusual. You don't do surgery like that, and if you do it one knee at a time. But that was Lafferty's insistence. Oh, get them both done, doctors. You can trust me. I will take good care of her in Shangri-La.
But the surgery is not a success. 4 weeks later, she is rushed back to Cedars-Sinai. A stroke weakens her even more.
She was a hollowed-out creature. She could barely talk, and the people at Cedars-Sinai recognized her as somebody who had been maltreated and ignored.
Doris was a very strong-willed, independent woman, and also very eccentric. And it was clear when I met her that her face had been refreshed at least once. So it didn't seem improbable that she would want to have another facelift. But just the idea of the butler trying to get her to have knee surgery just seems very implausible. She told me that she loved to dance, she loved to sing, so if her knees were bothering her, maybe she did want to have her knees fixed so that she could dance again.
But Harry Demopoulos believes that Lafferty is telling lies to the increasingly confused old woman. Lies that lead to a final, shocking telephone call.
I got a phone call from Doris. Harry, you're saying bad things about me. I said, what are you talking about, Doris? I couldn't possibly say anything bad about you. I love you. People in my family love you. We respect you. You're amazing. Doris, please. This just isn't true. You know what we've been through for 10 years. You've trusted me, and I think you have to trust me again. I think somebody is trying to hurt you. She said, no, I'm sorry, Harry. She said, I don't want to see you ever again. That was disconcerting.
Throughout her life, I think, with her husbands and her lovers and even her friends, she always had to be cautious about the motives of the people who surrounded her. Having $1 billion in the bank was a lot of people want to be close to that, but not necessarily the people you want to have around you.
The isolation of Doris Duke in her last days was real and tragic because Miss Duke did not trust anyone, because she thought they would only love her for her money. She did not have people that she could trust who were close to her at the end. People couldn't get through because almost a bubble had been created around Miss Duke. And as a result, she was at the mercy of someone like this completely irresponsible, opportunistic butler. We called Miss Duke several times during her last illness. There was never a return of those phone calls.
I've heard this many times in other cases. For the most part, it isn't true. People get frustrated because they can't get through, but many times the subject they want to talk to has told people, I don't want to talk to the doctor. I don't want to talk to this person. I'm tired. I don't feel well. Leave me alone. It's not unusual. This was a lady that was dying.
Doris's condition deteriorates quickly, and she dies of cardiac arrest. Bernard Lafferty, an uneducated butler who earns $40,000 a year, is suddenly the man in charge.
I found out about Doris's passing in my lab. Lafferty called me, and in his obsequious, characteristic Irish brogue, said that Miss Duke had passed away. And I said, wait, what happened? What happened? Click. He offered no explanation, just hung up. The next couple of days, I saw the will in the New York Times. They published everything.
Following her family's tradition of philanthropy, Doris Duke leaves, as expected, the bulk of her estate to the new Doris Duke Charitable Foundation. Its mission includes support to the performing arts, the environment, medical research, and the prevention of child abuse. But what comes next is a shock to everyone. Bernard Lafferty is named executor of the will, and trustee of the new foundation.
When I heard that she'd left $4.5 million to Bernard and $500,000 a year for the rest of his life, it struck me as kind of far-fetched. Being the executor of a billion-dollar estate is a very big deal. You have to be tremendously sophisticated. It was hard to imagine that Bernard, who seemed rather likable, but he seemed at the same time kind of simple, and I couldn't imagine that he would be able to handle something like that.
But Lafferty is up to the task. And because the will contains a highly unusual provision, he can even choose the institutional trustee to hold the assets. He appoints U.S. Trust.
In all of the prior wills of Miss Duke, there was an individual trustee and there was an institutional trustee. This is a system of checks and balances, so each one can look after the other and be a restraint on the other. In the Lafferty will, it gave him, for the first time, the complete power so that he could fire the institutional trustee if he chose to do so. So it put one man in a complete position of power. Power corrupts. He had absolute power. As the saying is, that corrupts absolutely.
That was unprecedented, and in fact unprecedented in estate law. Here was a person who was making $30,000 to $40,000 a year, who would suddenly be coming into the position of not only controlling $1 billion in funds, but would also be paid every year millions and millions of dollars of fees as a trustee and as an executor of the estate.
Marion Oates Charles, a friend of Doris Duke, is also named to the board of the charitable foundation. But Lafferty alone has the authority to appoint the 3 other members. His choices are Michael Jackson, the LSD guru Timothy Leary, and his friend Elizabeth Taylor, who has her own charity.
He wanted what I would call the Hollywood causes. He wanted Elizabeth Taylor to be on the board. He wanted to send her flowers. He wanted to make a flashy donation here and there. Instead of working with the children, the rainforest, the animals, the things that Miss Duke's will made clear were what she was looking out for.
Dr. Demopoulos is powerless to intervene. He believes Doris died in suspicious circumstances and that Lafferty is abusing his authority. But 3 months after Doris passes away, one of Lafferty's lawyers invites him to Doris Duke's New York City penthouse.
He said, you know, you were named as a prior executor and trustee of Doris's will. I said, what are you talking about? He said, no, you were the previous executor and trustee. I said, I had no idea. How did that happen? Well, this was written up in something like March 1991. I said, okay, why am I here? Apparently she changed the will and that's it. He said, no, New York state law requires that if you're named in a previous will, you have an obligation to check out the will, make sure that it was written fairly. He said, well, I'll be your lawyer so that if anybody wants to get to you, they have to come through me. I said, I don't need you. If there's something fishy going on, I want to know about it. I left.
Dr. Demopoulos is stunned by the revelation that if Doris had not changed her will, he would have been the executor. Now that he knows he has the right to challenge the will, he turns to attorneys Suzelle Smith and Don Howarth to have Lafferty expelled.
He said that he would do whatever it took. He would mortgage his house, but he felt that Doris Duke had been abused and taken advantage of, and he wanted to get to the bottom of it, and that her wishes were not being carried out.
I said, look, guys, I don't have any money, but I can assure you of one thing. I think I smell a rat, a big stinking one, then I will get to the truth of the matter.
Howarth and Smith decide to embrace the cause and prove that Lafferty is unfit as an executor.
Let's do it.
It's David against Goliath.
I bless the fact that we had these lawyers. They took a big risk. They didn't know if they were going to get anything out of it.
To defend himself, Bernard Lafferty has access to unlimited funds from the estate. he hires an army of lawyers, including celebrity lawyer Howard Weitzman, who defended the likes of Marlon Brando, Mike Tyson, and Michael Jackson.
I did like Bernard Lafferty. I thought he was a simple man, kind of an eccentric personality in a good sense, not in a bad sense. By the way, it's a story that's not unheard of, where someone takes an individual that they became close to and they put him in a position of trust and maybe even power, so to speak. It's not unusual. It was clear his whole life was Doris Duke. He ended up being her friend, her confidant, and ultimately, of course, she named him an executor in her estate.
I think that is utter and complete nonsense. She saw him in a very specific role, and she called him with a bell. Anyone who suggests that he was a confidant of Miss Duke's either does not know what they are talking about, or they are telling you something that's intentionally misleading and untrue.
I believe she was in sound mind. I knew the lawyers that were around her then, and I believe she did what she wanted to do. People may not have agreed with it, but they can't substitute their judgment or their wishes for what Ms. Duke wanted.
According to Dr. Demopoulos, Bernard Lafferty is running scared and wants to avoid litigation at all cost. He offers to buy him out.
They were going to give me $10 million in cold cash, and they would give me $100 million to have my own medical foundation if I would just leave, go away. And I said, I'm not doing this for money. I want him to be gone.
Next, with the help of Elizabeth Taylor, who maintains the Duke was entirely lucid when she spoke to her a month before her death, Lafferty tries to discredit Demopoulos. Taylor's PR firm issues a press release claiming that Demopoulos is motivated by greed. Raging mad, he consults his lawyers.
I said, my God, I don't want that money. Can I somehow negate it? They said, yes, you can write an affidavit. I said, well, let's get an affidavit typed up. Typed it up. I said, send it to the judge. And it said, I renounce all fees. Whatever fees I might collect should I become a trustee will be determined by Your Honor and by the Attorney General. This is not about money. This is about a charity from a person who had a soul, who left it to the people. It was not supposed to be Bernard Lafferty's playground and piggy bank.
Not to be outdone, Lafferty spends $300,000 and hires a detective firm to dig up any dirt on the doctor that might discredit him. But they find nothing. And Dr. Demopoulos starts to believe his life may be in danger.
We got some of Lafferty's writings. Dr. Demopoulos has to be destroyed. Dr. Demopoulos must be destroyed.
At least half a dozen parties are contesting Doris Duke's will. Banks unhappy to lose control, former employees, family members, as well as Shandi Hefner, Doris's adoptive daughter, whom she had completely cut out of her will.
No one else was related to Doris Duke. So when you're dealing with $1 billion estate, it made imminent practical sense to give Miss Hefner a very generous settlement to get her out of the lawsuit.
Shandi settles with Lafferty for $65 million.
Shandi deserved what she got. She actually should have gotten more because she had done nothing wrong. The law says that adopted daughters are equal to natural-born children. She was unfairly pushed aside. Shandi took good care of Doris. She didn't deserve the treatment that she got.
Demopoulos, however, will not settle. Handwritten notes show that Lafferty wants to destroy him.
On one occasion when I was working late at my lab, my wife called me up and she said, Harry, there's some guy who was asking about you, and he's got a voice like he's from a movie about the mafia. I've never heard anybody as scary as this guy.
The very next day, a menacing truck comes speeding behind Demopoulos.
I moved over to the right lane. He followed me. I then moved back into the middle lane. He followed me again, all the time beeping his horn. And at that time, I had a water pistol in my car, and I aimed it at him, and he took off. May have been coincidence, but I've been driving that road for 20 years now. Never had any kind of a problem.
Finally, the hearings begin. The court is about to consider whether Bernard Lafferty is fit to be the executor of Doris Duke's will. Judge Preminger, who is now retired from the bench, can talk openly about the case.
Well, there were an enormous number of lawyers on the side of Lafferty and U.S. Trust. Nobody needed that many lawyers. They sort of acted, at least to me, as if they had a blank check and could hire anyone they wanted, and occasionally hired someone because that person was rumored to be a friend of mine, which I particularly resented. And I think it was inappropriate.
Well, sometimes lawyers are called sharks, and some people did think that there was blood in the water and the sharks were swimming, but the sharks that were getting paid were largely on the Lafferty payroll. And sometimes none of them said anything at the hearing, so it was an interesting show.
There always seems to be too many lawyers involved, but when people are vulnerable and scared, lawyers get involved. As I told Mr. Lafferty on more than one occasion, only one side wins. That's just the way it goes.
During the hearings, Smith and Howarth take depositions from various witnesses. To prove that Lafferty is unfit as an executor, they get access to Doris Duke's credit card statements.
Before Miss Duke even died, while she was in her last illness, Mr. Lafferty took her credit cards. He went out on several binges of spending and drinking on Rodeo Drive in Beverly Hills. He bought diamond-studded earrings, or at least one of them. He bought a gold watch for $35,000. He did not have a driver's license, but he, in a drunken state, crashed her car into the Whiskey A Go-Go in Hollywood. So Mr. Lafferty was completely out of control before she had died.
He was almost childlike in his enjoyment of things. You know, he was not a well-educated man. This was more than he had ever thought of in terms of access to money. But yes, he did try to enjoy what had been given him. And he was entitled to do that, in my opinion. He did some things I wouldn't have suggested he do, and probably in retrospect, he wouldn't have done it, but I don't think he did it with the wrong intentions, certainly not with any criminal intent in mind.
Bernard Lafferty was a complete loose cannon. He was a repeated drunk. He would go on binge drinking. He clearly used some drugs that he shouldn't have had access to. He would pick up people and get into trouble as a result in romantic encounters. Bernard Lafferty was a man who had major problems in his life. He was struggling with them, and Miss Duke was helping him in that process and helping him by employing him. After she died, he began sleeping in her bed. He combed his hair and dyed it the color of her hair. He wore her clothing. He actually seemed to believe that he was Miss Duke. So this was not just some scheming butler who wanted the money. This was someone who was seriously playing without a full deck there.
Miss Duke had a great sense of respect and obligation to the memory of her father, who had earned the money. There was no way Doris Duke wanted to meet J.B. Duke in the afterlife and say, "I left your fortune to an Irish butler with drug and alcohol problems."
Howarth and Smith also learned that Lafferty spends considerable estate money for luxurious renovations in Doris's houses he still resides in. He also borrows a total of $825,000 from U.S. Trust to pay for his personal expenses as he waits to cash in from the estate.
The situation between Bernard Lafferty and U.S. Trust was what we in law would call a clear conflict of interest. They had every incentive to make sure that Lafferty was taken care of the way he wanted to be taken care of, instead of having an independent voice in the administration of that mistake.
The loan to Mr. Lafferty might have been strange, and in retrospect, maybe something we wouldn't have done. I don't think it was a legitimate conflict of interest, and I don't think it was done for any other reasons than they believe he would have the ability to pay it back.
Other depositions raised troubling questions concerning Doris Duke's mental state. When Doris revised her will to name Lafferty 6 months before her death in front of 4 witnesses, including Dr. Kivowitz, was she of sound mind?
The signature is not at all like Miss Duke's earlier signatures. It is much bigger, it is broken, it is almost as if she were stuttering.
We believe that she had been unduly influenced and that at the time she signed the will, the circumstances were very suspicious.
She also was unwise in giving him the health proxy. That means that he, Lafferty, could make the medical decisions for her. When to pull the plug, what to get done, what not to have done.
We'll never know, I guess. Maybe she wasn't completely in her right mind. Clearly he was someone she cared about, but it seemed far-fetched to be handing over so much power and responsibility and money to him.
It's my recollection that well before she was on her deathbed, Ms. Duke had told people and had intentions or began to modify estate documents to make Mr. Lafferty an executor of her estate. So it isn't as if this fact took place on her deathbed. I don't believe that's the case at all. I believe the appointment was in the works before she became terminal.
Getting access to the medical records is somewhat of a challenge.
It took my lawyers a long time to get all the records. We kept getting stonewalled, and Judge Preminger took appropriate actions. I went through each page, made charts. I did things like measure her weight, her blood pressure, what she was eating, what drugs she was taking.
So the last 6 weeks of Doris Duke's life were under highly suspicious circumstances. She had been in Cedars-Sinai at the hospital, and then a decision was made by Bernard Lafferty and her doctors to take her back to Falcon's Lair. But the medical records said that the reason was her rehabilitation would be better at Falcon's Lair even than in the hospital. The prognosis was good for her rehabilitation. When she got to Falcon's Lair, that all changed.
Nurses who took care of Doris Duke also testify. They took notes of what happened during the final weeks.
On day 1, when she got home, she said, "I'm going to be murdered." Quote, unquote, in the nurse's notes. They put down everything that happened. After a few days, Doris called in Bernard Lafferty, and she started yelling at him. She said, "Bernard, you're the cause of all my problems. Get the car ready, and let's go back to Cedars-Sinai Hospital. I want out of here." Lafferty called a doctor who was taking care of Doris, and that doctor ordered morphine and Demerol and Valium around the clock, which was unusual. The nurses kept writing down, "No pain, patient has no pain, patient has no pain."
Next, the bombshell. A nurse believes there was a conspiracy to murder Duke through the use of massive sedation.
There's a whole list of medications that were inappropriate. Now, that probably was Lafferty's doing, because he had the healthcare proxy. He was Mr. Duke and Mrs. Duke at the same time, giving orders to the doctors.
After 5 days of deposition testimony and medical records, Dr. Kivowitz said that the decision to administer the dose of morphine, which would end her life, was the proper medical decision to make. The explanation was that she was in pain and that her quality of life was very poor and that she would have wanted to go on and die. He did not discuss this with Miss Duke. He did not reduce the drugs to ask her if she wanted to die, if she'd like to see a priest or a rabbi or a minister. So those circumstances were highly unusual, highly suspicious.
Here's what I can say about Dr. Kivowitz. One of the better doctors, certainly in Southern California, if not the nation. I'm confident that he conducted himself in the most professional of manners.
Smith and Howarth ask Ira Reiner, former district attorney of Los Angeles, what he thinks of Doris Duke's death.
Under the definition of murder under California law, it is taking the life of another, causing the death of another intentionally. And he said, that's what you've just described to me.
It seems too much like a kind of fantasy of a murder mystery, and it just seemed too far-fetched.
The records show that Lafferty authorized substantial payments shortly before Duke's death. Dr. Kivowitz received $50,000 a month, and Dr. Glassman gets a $500,000 gift.
Lafferty, I think, paid the doctors because he did not want somebody who would be a stand-up witness against him, for example, if he did anything to take advantage of Miss Duke, to hasten her death, or to put himself into the will as trustee. He wanted to keep people around him who he had control of, and I believe that he did that.
Well, I think Mr. Lafferty believed these people extended Miss Duke's life for a period of time, and I think he was trying to show his gratefulness. I don't think there was any payoff here. I know these doctors. I did part of the investigation. I spent a lot of time with Mr. Lafferty. I don't believe anybody did anything wrong. I understand it makes great theater.
Even Doris Duke's burial plans were questioned.
In Article 1 of Doris Duke's will, she specified that she wanted to be buried at sea. But she had told a number of people during her lifetime, including us, that she did not want to be cremated. In fact, she was afraid of fire.
Strangely enough, the undertaker's hearse was there waiting for the body, and she was cremated very shortly after she was picked up.
Well, you know, when you cremate a body, you can't do an autopsy anymore. So again, I suggest that these are not coincidences. In law, we say there was no evidence left.
Here's the bottom line. Ms. Duke was dying, no doubt about it. She had a terminal illness, no doubt about it. She loved Bernard Lafferty. She took him every place with her in the last part of her life. No doubt about that. She changed her will because that's what she wanted to do. I don't believe anybody could have made Doris Duke change her will if she did not want to. And so because people were shocked, how could she appoint Bernard Lafferty, an illiterate houseman or butler? She did what she wanted to do.
All these facts send shockwaves across America. And now Judge Preminger has a big decision to make. One that will potentially impact the countless people Doris's foundation intends to help. As the hearings progress, Judge Preminger is astounded by the sensational allegations against Lafferty and the completely opposite arguments from both sides. In an unusual decision, she appoints a special investigator, Richard Q.
I needed an independent, impartial person who was an expert to see what the real facts were, and I needed it done quickly because I was very conscious of time being important in this case because there was all this money lying around that should be put in use. I also needed someone who was incorruptible.
Q spends 90 days on the road interviewing people with pertinent information. He has unrestricted access to all documents.
What I was trying to find out from the Q report was what the facts were as to drug addiction, alcoholism, waste, U.S. Trust's relationship with Mr. Lafferty. They explained that they did not have a conflict because they were above reproach. I didn't feel that was enough of a response.
The Q report details numerous findings, including Miss Duke's poor mental state when she changed her will, troubling medical practices, conflicts of interest, and inappropriate conduct on the part of Lafferty, who squandered millions.
I can tell you that many people, by affidavit, declaration, refuted the findings of Mr. Q's report. When I read the report, I thought some of the findings were, in my opinion, ludicrous and just not well taken.
The Los Angeles District Attorney's Office decides to conduct a criminal investigation, but no charges are made.
The District Attorney's Office determined that there was no evidence to indicate that there was any homicide or unlawful conduct to cause somebody to be charged with murder or manslaughter. So with all due respect to Mr. Reiner and others, I don't believe it existed. That is, any evidence existed that anybody did anything wrong to Miss Duke. I actually found Bernard Lafferty to be an emotional wreck during the accusation period most of the time. He could not understand why people would make the accusations. I believe he had a big heart, and I think he was confused by the allegations. He was in another world for him. He was involved with people whose only motivations, in my opinion, were to get their hands on the money.
At the last of the 6 court hearings, the time for a verdict has come. The Q report corroborates most of the arguments of Dr. Demopoulos and his lawyers, and Judge Preminger rules in their favor. To avoid being left with nothing, Lafferty agrees to a flat payment of $4.5 million and $500,000 a year for life. But he has to surrender his post as a state executor and trustee. And for the first time in U.S. history, a large financial institution, U.S. Trust, is removed as co-executor for failing to do anything to stop Lafferty.
I believe Judge Preminger made a number of mistakes. I found her to be difficult. I didn't think much of her as a judge. I thought the whole process was erroneous and inappropriate.
Only a few months after the judgment, at age 51, Bernard Lafferty dies of a heart attack.
Bernard Lafferty died out of depression and a broken heart. You could say money didn't buy him happiness. He never really got to enjoy what others thought he was enjoying. I was just his lawyer and perhaps a friend near the end of his life. I'm not his champion in the sense of his lifestyle, but I believe when someone finds themselves in the position that Mr. Lafferty did, he's entitled to a benefit of the doubt.
He seemed like the kind of person who kind of depended on a strong character in his life for his life to make sense. And after Doris died, hard to imagine how he was able to function.
I do feel sorry for the fact that the crush of the legal system, in effect, in the end, I believe, killed him. And that's a sad story. That's why I say justice wasn't well served for Mr. Lafferty or for Miss Duke, in my opinion.
In his will, he leaves all his property to the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation.
That was his way of showing her respect. I don't believe it was a public relations move, as some have said. Listen, I was around then. I talked to Bernard Lafferty. I believe I know where his heart and his head were, and I believe if he died, he wanted all that was left to go right back where it came from, and that was the Duke Foundation.
So sometimes I'm asked whether Bernard Lafferty could have done this on his own without any help, and there's no way that the Butler could have orchestrated this entire effort on his own without the assistance of others.
With respect to her ultimate wishes for the money for the disposition of the estate, I think justice has been done. The area where I don't know that justice has ever been done is in the circumstances of her death. As far as I'm concerned, that has never been properly addressed by the legal system.
Before he died, Doris Duke's father had impressed upon her to trust no one. This warning stuck with her all her life, for better or worse.
It was very sad that she didn't know who she could trust. If Doris Duke had set up during her lifetime the Duke Foundation, we would never have had a will contest, we would never have had the Lafferty story, we wouldn't have had the waste. But because of a lack of trust, that didn't happen during her life, and it cost her charities because of it.
Today, Dr. Demopoulos is one of the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation's trustees. The foundation is solidly back on track, and Doris can rest in peace, knowing her final wishes will be honored.